Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the South African Immunology Society webinar hosted in collaboration with Immunopaedia. I'm Theresa Rossouw from the Department of Immunology at the University of Pretoria, and I'm the current president of the South African Immunology Society. I shall be the moderator for today's webinar, and we will have one talk, and it will be followed by a live question and answer session. So today is the International Day of Immunology. And it's a day when we celebrate our achievements in the field and we share with you our love for immunology. And especially when we reflect over the last 2.5 years of the COVID-19 pandemic, we really have a lot to celebrate. For those of you who are not familiar with this field, immunology is the study of the immune system, which protects us from infection through various lines of defense. So if the immune system is not functioning properly, it can lead to diseases such as severe COVID-19, but also other illnesses like autoimmune diseases, allergy, and cancer, to name just a few. So over the past 2.5 years, immunology has really proven to be instrumental for the diagnosis, treatment, and prevention of SARS-CoV-2. And we certainly, as I said, have a lot to be proud of. So we've decided to devote today's webinar to COVID-19 vaccines, due to their important role in helping us through and hopefully help us end this pandemic. There have been a lot of misinformation about the vaccines, and we will therefore take the first half an hour to bring you up to date with the science about the vaccines and their real-world effectiveness. We will then hand over to a team of students who will be asking questions that they've been grappling with about the vaccine, and they will be asking these questions to one of our country's foremost virology experts. Participants will also have the opportunity to ask their own questions, and I ask that you please use the question and answer panel for this. So our first speaker is Dr. Nyaradzo Chigorimbo-Tsikiwa, or Nyari. She is a senior researcher and lecturer in the Division of Medical Virology at UCT, where she leads a research group investigating the interaction of the immune system with viruses. Her research training and specialization is in HIV immunology and drug discovery. Her current research investigates how viruses infect human cells in the laboratory and includes growing viruses and finding ways to stop them being infective. She's passionate about making science accessible to everyone through scientific engagement with the public. So we really look forward to your talk. Nyari, it's over to you.
Thank you so much for that introduction. And let me see if I can share my screen and then we can get started. Just checking that you can all see my screen. Girls, you can nod your heads if you can. Super, okay. So yes, as Theresa said, my name is Nyaradzo, but everyone calls me Nyari. And I'm really excited to be giving this presentation today. Well, first and foremost, because there are some really cool people who are watching this, the girls from Jeppe High School, which is really, really cool. I'm always excited when I see young women coming to listen to these things and finding out about this before they get to university. But I also understand that we have undergraduate students who are also present, as well as postgraduate students and some senior virologists and immunologists. So I've tried to pitch this talk at a level that everyone can understand. And so you'll see I've used a lot of infographics to try and get this across to everyone. And this was from my daughter, a 14-year-old's advice. So if it doesn't work, please blame her and not me. But let me get right into it as we go. So what I'm going to talk about today is I'll briefly speak about the immune system and COVID-19 vaccines. Thankfully, Theresa has already done quite a nice introduction about the immune system. And then I'll spend a bit of time talking about vaccine development. And then we'll talk about the types of the COVID-19 vaccines that are available and their impact. And then we'll briefly discuss some vaccine side effects and some myths that are there. And then I'll just conclude with a few concluding remarks. And so, as I was saying, Theresa has done a really nice job explaining what the immune system is. So really, the immune system is your body's natural defense system. If you would like to envision it, it sort of looks like a force field. I don't know, those of you who watch the Star Wars movies, you know, those force fields that they always have. it's kind of like that. It's your body's force field against pathogens. But not only is it a force field, but you also have soldiers also who participate in this defense system. And these soldiers are the different cells that are there that provide that immune response. And so vaccines, what they actually do, they're a mechanism that scientists use to teach or to train your immune system. So your natural immune system is trained by vaccines to fight off pathogens. It's really kind of like going to school. So, you know, like, you know, those who are in matric know at some stage they're going to write an exam where they'll be examined whether they've learned the things they should have during the years. And so when you now meet the virus, SARS-CoV-2 itself, it's kind of like that exam where your immune system then get tested to see if it will be able to fight off that invasion or infection. And if your immune system has gone to school by being vaccinated, as shown in this picture here, then, you know, it can then mount a robust immune response fighting off that infection. So you can either fight off the infection or you can prevent severe COVID-19 disease. And so really the COVID-19 vaccines that we have currently, they were designed to enable us to prevent severe COVID-19 disease and deaths caused by the SARS-CoV-2 virus. And this is sort of how they do it. This is to show you here that there are various components of the immune system which actually participate in providing immunity that get taught by these vaccines how to fight off these infections. So you have your T helper cells, which are part of this, but they are mediated and helped by a really, really important cell group called the antigen presenting cells. These are my favorite cells. I like working on those. And they work together with B cells, and B cells are the ones that make your antibodies, and we've all heard about antibodies and how they wane and all of that. But this picture here in the green little particles there shows what antibodies look like. And these antibodies, what they do is they bind to the virus and neutralize it, which means they make the virus not dangerous for you. And then we have the cytotoxic T cells. Now, these are also really, really amazing cells. Now, why they're amazing is because there are also other cells which are called the memory T cells as well as B cells, which actually have what we call immune memory. Now, why this is important, it's like, you know, like as I was saying with the students who'll be writing exams, it's one thing to learn your curricula, but it's another thing to remember it. And what these cells do, these memory cells, they actually have the ability to remember how to fight the infection long term, so over a long period of time. And so you really want those. And so this is what's amazing about these vaccines. And a lot of work has come out actually showing us that these cells, which are the memory cells, are a really major part of our immune defense towards SARS-CoV-2. And so what I want to show here really is the process that's the research clinical trial process. Now, every agent that is introduced to the human body, whether it be a drug or a vaccine, needs to undergo this rigorous testing. The reason why this system is in place is to ensure that whatever human beings are given intravenously or orally has been tested to ensure its safety, and not only its safety, but that it actually has an effect, that it has the biological activity that it needs to. And the process in which this is done is the research clinical trial. So the vaccines that we have currently went through this process. It's quite a long process. It involves 5 steps. It really starts out in the laboratory where, you know, the agents that have activity which can work as vaccines are tested in small animals, and then they're tested for safety in a small number of individuals. And then the studies then expanded into various phases, which include more and more people, and then you really can get information about the efficacy rate and the adverse events. And why this is important is that the more people that you test your candidates in, then the safer you know the profile is. So if it passes that safety profile during the research clinical trial process, you can be sure that it will be safe in use in the majority of the population, because scientists make sure that this is the case. And I would like to assure everyone that the COVID-19 vaccines that we are currently using that have been approved have all undergone this process. Now, a lot of people ask, so how come it was so fast then? How come, you know, for most vaccines and other drugs, it takes a really long time? These vaccines came about really quickly, and that is a valid concern, but it's a concern that actually really has a response, and a response that's based in fact. And the reason is that we were able to carry out research clinical trials for the COVID-19 vaccine candidates concurrently. So whilst people were testing for whilst people were doing preclinical testing, there were many candidates that were undergoing preclinical testing. And not only that, but some of these phases here were combined. And so that allowed things to happen much quicker. But not only is that the main reason also was just that the building blocks that we built and designed the COVID-19 vaccines were developed previously. So, I mean, I'm sure a lot of you are aware of Lego and this Lego effect. So when you've built whatever you're building with your Lego set, you can deconstruct it and build another thing. So from one Lego set, you can either build a small little house, you can build a little airplane, you can build different things. As long as you have the building blocks, you're able to build various things. And this is exactly what happened with the COVID-19 vaccines. The building blocks, the scientific building blocks that were used for the COVID-19 vaccines were already there and had been tested in other diseases. And so a lot of this work actually has been done in the HIV field, even in Ebola, as well as even in measles. So some of that technology was borrowed and used for these COVID-19 vaccines. And as a result, what needed to be done, and what I'm showing in this picture here, is that you could build different things from the same set of Lego. All you need to do when you're now building a new and advanced system is you just need to change the very specific part. So in the circle here, you can see with this galaxy spaceship here, what needed to be done in this case was just to build the windshield for the spacecraft, right? So not every single block needed to be built. And so that allowed things to happen very quickly. But it's one thing to have the building blocks in place, but also what came together for the COVID-19 vaccines to allow their really fast development was that a lot of scientists came together. I mean, from the time that the genetic sequence of the SARS-CoV-2 virus was released in Wuhan, I mean, a lot of people came together and started speaking about ways in which they can develop vaccines that are efficacious and safe. And so that really helped things a lot, where there is information and knowledge and money, which was also very important, things can happen. And so the building blocks were there. People were working together in teams. I mean, people were communicating across countries in ways that, in fact, was quite unprecedented. People have never shared ideas so freely as they have during the development of these vaccines, but also the money was there. I mean, I think some of you might be aware of Operation Warp Speed. This is an initiative where the US government put up over $18 billion towards the development of these vaccine candidates. So where there's money and there's information and teamwork, things can happen really quickly. And so that's literally what happened. And as a result of that, we have a different type of COVID-19 vaccines that are actually available. Well, and some of them are currently still under testing, and they have different mechanisms that they use. So we have the virus vaccines, which use attenuated virus, which is virus that has been generated in the laboratory and then destroyed so that it not destroyed, but neutralized, so that when it's injected into you, it doesn't kill you, but it trains your immune system. It teaches your immune system how to fight the next time. And so we have vaccines that use that mechanism. We don't have any of those licensed in South Africa, but these are licensed in China. So Sinopharm and Sinovac are vaccines that use this technology, and those are currently being used. And we have the viral vector vaccines. And now these viral vector vaccines include the J&J vaccine, which we use here in South Africa, and the AstraZeneca vaccine. And they use different vectors in which the vaccine then is uses to teach your immune system. And then we also have the protein-based viruses. So we are more familiar with these, and I think most of us have heard of these before, where protein particles, protein subunits of the pathogen are injected to the individual to provide that immune response. And so we have those, but we don't have any of those licensed in South Africa. Novavax, which is a vaccine clinical candidate, which is actually being under registration right now in the US, is one of those vaccines that uses this mechanism. And so there are many different different mechanisms that can be used to provide vaccination. And the last but not least are the very popular mRNA vaccines. And so these come under the nucleic acid vaccine category. So we also have DNA vaccines, but the RNA vaccines are the ones that have really been very popularized with the Pfizer, BioNTech vaccines that have been licensed in South Africa and in other countries as well that we currently use. And so this slide really was just to show you that there are over 200 vaccine candidates that are in testing or have been approved. And so really scientists have been working really hard to deal with this vaccine to deal with SARS-CoV-2 disease. And in this slide here, what I'm trying to show here is that, so all this work that scientists have been doing, has it paid out? Does it work? Why did they bother? And what I'm showing here is data that came from the UK during the second wave of the SARS-CoV-2 infections and the third wave. What we see here during the second wave is we see the numbers of cases really mirror the numbers of deaths that the country experienced. So as we had more cases, as there were more cases of SARS-CoV-2, then the numbers of deaths also really were matching. And so we see, though, that in the third wave shown here, and I hope you can see my pointer, we see that there was this decoupling of the cases and the deaths. So once the vaccines were introduced, and in the UK, they were very quick about this. Once they started introducing them, they rolled them out quite quickly. And by the time they had the third wave, they had achieved very high vaccine coverage, I think over 80%. And so what we see here is that the vaccines in the UK during the third wave had a huge impact in reducing the numbers of deaths that they experienced. And not only was this seen in the UK, we saw the same thing here in South Africa as well. And so what this infographic here from the Western Cape government is showing us, this is from individuals who are over 60 years, and we know that these individuals are the ones who are most at risk with severe COVID-19 disease. We see that at that time in our country during our Delta wave, we only had 38% of individuals over 60 who were vaccinated. But of those, we only had 38% were vaccinated, but the COVID-19 cases that were experienced were only in 8% of people who were, those were 8%, only 8% of them were vaccinated. Now, what this shows us really is that the vaccines did help prevent infections, but most profoundly, not only did they help prevent infections, they also prevented COVID-19 admissions. Now, COVID-19 admissions are a proxy for severe disease. So if you're very sick, you'll go to the hospital, right? And so what we saw is that only 4% of individuals who were admitted during the Delta wave were actually vaccinated, only 4%. And also only 1.7% of those individuals who died were vaccinated. So really what we're seeing is, you can see this reduction in the proportion of this white individuals here who are representing the vaccinated people. And what we're seeing really is that the vaccines, even here in South Africa, and in particularly our vulnerable groups, they were able to protect our population. So we don't only see that in the Western Cape, but also in Gauteng, the same effect was seen. But most profoundly, and what everyone keeps asking about, is this Omicron, that Omicron has changed the game. We see the same effect as well with Omicron. So what we see, this is what I'm showing here, is the data that was released by the Discovery Medical Aid. This is data that came from their members who are part of their medical aid scheme, showing the numbers of people who had infections, and those who were admitted, and those who died. And we see, even with the Omicron variant, which did not cause very severe disease, but we see that actually the numbers of infections was reduced in people who were vaccinated. So most infections were in people who were unvaccinated, 79% more in people who were unvaccinated. And profoundly, severe COVID-19 disease was also prevented, even with the Omicron variant, where we see this 92% reduction in risk relative to the unvaccinated. And so this is really quite important. But everyone keeps speaking about how people didn't die during the Omicron wave, but actually people did die, and even with those individuals who died, we still see that the majority, significantly more, the majority of people who died from Omicron even were people who were unvaccinated. And so really these vaccines work. They prevent severe disease. And we can see even now post-Omicron, so this is data that I downloaded 2 days ago, and we see the vaccine coverage still in the UK, which we looked at in the early waves, and South Africa now currently. This is shaded according to the numbers of vaccines that people have received. And we can see the dark green countries are the ones where they have had the most vaccine coverage. So we can see over 90%, some of them above 80 to over 90% vaccine coverage. And we can see in South Africa, in this case, we've only achieved about 42%. So we're not doing really that well. Would like more, but when you look at the UK, they still have a lot of numbers vaccinated. We see even now that when we look at excess deaths, we see that South Africa, with its lower vaccination numbers, still has very high excess deaths, even though we know the numbers of cases that we're reporting are significantly lower than those in the UK. But we see that the numbers of excess deaths is actually significantly lower in those countries. So even today, we still see that the vaccines have a profound effect in reducing mortality. And so they're still providing that protection against severe COVID-19 disease and death. So how do they do that, right? And so this is the question that most people ask. And some of it we think has to do with this impact of the viral load that people have. So what this graph here is showing, it's showing the amount of virus, which is being shown as a CT value. So this is a proxy. So the higher the CT value, the higher the amount of virus an individual has. So this is a plot in which individuals who experience breakthrough infections. So yes, we do know that people who are vaccinated can have breakthrough infections, but they're known as breakthrough infections. But what we see is that even though in the beginning of the infectious cycle, there tends to be similar viral loads, but if you see here in the green, the amount of virus that people who are vaccinated has decreases very quickly. Now, this has profound impact on the community. So if you have less virus to transmit, then it means less people can get sick, and this really breaks the transmission cycle. And so this really is quite important. And we see here in people who are unvaccinated that the viral load does not decrease that as quickly. And so we think this is what it has to do. But one of the important things to note here is that also just because you can detect virus in a person doesn't mean that it has the ability to cause illness. So what this paper did, they were investigating whether the infection that people who have breakthrough infections were vaccinated is the same as people who have never been vaccinated. So what they did is they looked at healthcare workers who were unvaccinated and had infections, and who were vaccinated and had breakthrough infections, and they looked at those CT values, which is a proxy for viral load. And so we see in this study, yes, which was done in the beginning of this infection, that really there's no significant difference in the CT value as I showed in the previous one. But what we see here, though, is very important, that we see when you now take the virus that is present in people who have these breakthrough infections and you try and infect cells with that in the lab, there actually is a significant difference. The virus that people have who have had breakthrough infections does not have the same ability to form new infections as the virus which is present in people who've been unvaccinated. And so this is one mechanism that people think this is why this is going on. So what it just generally shows is that the amount of viral shedding is diminished, and the quality of the virus that people have who have breakthrough infections is not so good at causing subsequent infections. And so we also have other benefits from vaccinations. Not only do we have this reduction in deaths, but also we see that people who are vaccinated also protect members in their household who cannot be vaccinated. So this was a study that was published in Science, and it shows that there's an indirect protection of children in homes with adults that have been vaccinated. So we see this 94.4% protection of young children from parents who have been vaccinated. And we also see that really, even if one parent is vaccinated, we see a lower amount of protection, but if both of them are, then we see a higher amount of protection. So really, even in the household, it has huge impact to have adults who are vaccinated who can protect those members who cannot be vaccinated, such as children or even the elderly, who even when they're vaccinated sometimes don't mount as robust immune response as people who are younger. And so really what this graph here is showing, and I'm really sorry that there's quite a lot of it here, but this is a really, really cool study. What this study was showing was that when people are vaccinated, which is shown in the top panel here, different vaccines were tested to see how the serum from individuals who were vaccinated is able to neutralize different variants. So we see, firstly, which is important, that people who were convalescent, so convalescent are people who had natural immunity, who were not vaccinated but only had a previous infection. So we see that indeed natural immunity does provide antibodies and those immune factors that prevent infection. But what we see is that when you're vaccinated here in panel H, convalescent vaccinated or vaccinated convalescent individuals, they have a really, really superior immune response compared to individuals who are only vaccinated or only natural infection. But people who had, in this panel, which is shown here, people who were vaccinated and even had different vaccines in which they were vaccinated with, which we're currently doing here in South Africa, they had a much better vaccine response. And so right now, actually, it is a good idea to receive a vaccination, and if you can, mix and match the vaccines. So really, this is just showing us that vaccines have a huge impact, and natural immunity itself is not as strong as hybrid immunity. And so one of the other things is, as I mentioned, we don't only have antibodies. So what those serum studies looked at, they look at the impact of antibodies. But what researchers, and I'm quite proud to say, researchers here at UCT, right here in my division here at medical school. So this is work that has come out of Wendy Burgess and Catherine Rio's lab, and they've actually looked at this T cell responses. Remember, those T cells are the cells that I said can have this memory to remember to fight infections, and then we have the CD8s, which actually kill. Those are the cytotoxic cells. So we've seen that in this study that they published in Nature, they showed that individuals who, and this was in our J&J healthcare worker cohort, what they saw was that individuals who were vaccinated with one vaccine or two vaccines, and in the case of individuals who had two Pfizer vaccines, they were able to mount a very good CD4 response. And when we look at the convalescent here, we see it is there. It is also not bad, but we see that this vaccine response is actually quite more robust. And we see it even more profoundly with the CD8s, and the CD8s are those killer cells we're talking about. The convalescent CD8s responses were not as good as the vaccine responses. So really, just to carry on with that message, that the vaccines are really good at providing memory and providing this cell-mediated immune responses. And not only do they do that, and another reason is that they also provide protection against long COVID. So a lot of individuals who really don't get severe COVID-19, but actually experience long COVID, but we've also seen that there's a 54 to 64% reduction in long COVID symptoms in individuals who get breakthrough infections. And so there are really many reasons why we should be vaccinated. On an individual level, it protects you, but on a community level, it protects really the population in general. And so some people, even though they know this information, are still scared. They have these fears, and it's okay to have fears. But what we need to do with fears, we need to look at them and identify what is a real fear. I mean, a fear that is based on fact, or a fear that's based on myth. So there are some vaccine side effects, and these are the real ones that I've listed here, like pain and redness at the site of injection. I mean, there's nothing you can do about it. You get pricked, it'll be ANA. So that's a real side effect. And sometimes people experience fevers and chills and nausea and headaches after vaccination. But all these symptoms and all these are really treated by taking a Panado afterwards, and in 2 days or so, it comes right. And in a very low number of individuals, though, there are some people who have experienced anaphylaxis. Now, anaphylaxis is this life-threatening allergic reaction, and people who have this condition is because they're allergic to some of the components in the vaccine. Now, what has happened with the SARS-CoV-2 vaccine development is people have used hypoallergenic mechanisms to synthesize these vaccines to try and deal with that. So no eggs, you know, that kind of thing. So what we see is that really generally in the public, you'll find people do have anaphylactic reactions to things like peanut allergies, that's quite common. But what we see is the risk of having anaphylaxis due to the COVID-19 vaccines is significantly lower than the normal risk of having anaphylaxis generally in the population. So really this risk is very negligible, and we also manage it. When you get vaccinated, the practitioner always asks you to sit down for 15 minutes before they allow you to leave, and individuals who experience anaphylaxis always do so within 15 minutes. And so you're good to go after 15 minutes, and if you do get into anaphylactic shock, it can be treated. The other side effect are these blood clots, which I think a lot of people know about, and it is true, some individuals do experience them, and this was seen a lot more with AstraZeneca, and in some cases the J&J. But these symptoms, so these are the things that when you get vaccinated, the clinician will advise you, say, if you experience a severe headache or visual changes or any of those other symptoms, please come back to your practitioner and let them know, and they will treat you for whatever side effects you might be experiencing. This goes the same thing with the myocarditis, pericarditis side effects that have also been reported. And what is important to know here, like I said, this is a risk management game, right? The risk is there, but the risk of getting myocarditis from the virus itself really is significantly much more. So there are more chances of you getting myocarditis from COVID-19 infection than actually from the vaccine itself. And so you are at lower risk of getting that from the vaccine. And so really, it's not something one should worry about too much. And so there are lots of myths that people have spoken about, that people die once they get vaccinated. And I mean, death is not something to joke or laugh about, because it really is scary and has a huge impact on people's lives. But the truth is, right now we have, I think, 12 billion vaccines that have been administered into individuals. If the vaccines were killing people, you cannot hide 12 billion bodies. So we're just not seeing the dead bodies. Lots of people have been vaccinated worldwide, but we're not seeing the body. So really, the vaccines aren't killing people. And this risk of autism, we know that is not true. And infertility, that is not true either. And I think we have something that we'll speak to that a bit later. And this DNA alteration, the vaccine cannot change or alter your DNA. That can only happen when you are still an egg or a sperm, and the vaccines do not interact in that stage. So there's no risk of DNA alteration. And others think that you can get COVID-19 from the vaccine. The vaccine does not cause COVID-19. However, if you get the vaccine and then you engage in risky behavior, you go out to parties because you don't think you're safe, before you have immunity, you can get COVID-19, but really it's not the vaccine that has caused it. And so what I'm just trying to show here is that there are many variants that are present, and currently we're seeing that Omicron, which is shown here at the end there, this Omicron variants here, this is really very pretty. So what we see here is that, we've had various variants that have come about during the time course of the different infections of SARS-CoV-2 in South Africa. And right now we're experiencing an uptick in the Omicron numbers of cases. And unfortunately, what we're seeing also is that there seems to be no prior memory for individuals, particularly who are unvaccinated. And so we will get new variants coming up. There really will be an onslaught of those. But the best thing to protect you against new variants that will come up, and we don't know what is coming, are really vaccinations. We see that the vaccines are really effective at doing that, and even with Omicron. So vaccine effectiveness really is very good. We've shown that. I've shown you from the data. And also the type of vaccine you take has an impact on that, and also the time of how long you've last had your vaccine. So this is why it's important to get your boosters if you're due for them, so that you can boost your immune response. And also your immune status has an impact on how well the vaccine will work for you. So there are some individuals who we know, even though they've been vaccinated, will not mount a good immune response. And so this is why it's important for everybody else around them to also vaccinate. And we've also seen that the variants have an impact on the vaccine effectiveness. But we see that the vaccines have been so good at minimizing severe COVID-19 disease and deaths caused by the virus. And so really what I want to say, which is our take-home message here, is that vaccines are safe and effective. They have proven themselves. and they offer really good protection against severe COVID-19 disease on an individual level and for the community. And so I almost think it's kind of like it's raining. When you know rain is going to come, your best protection against rain is to take an umbrella or wear a raincoat. And so this is what the vaccines are. They're an umbrella, they're a raincoat, they're like a safety belt that ensures that when you encounter variants which are out in the community, you will be safe and protected against severe COVID-19 disease. And excitingly, the second generation vaccines, which are more specific for the variants, are in development. And so that's also very exciting, that's coming up. And so I would like to advise everyone here to stick to good sources of information. There are lots of people out there who say all sorts of different things, but verify the information you've received, whether it's legitimate. And one way to do that is see if other people who actually study those things agree with that, what that person is saying. This is known as the peer review process. So if you're hearing things on WhatsApp or on Telegram, which is unsupervised, people are hiding in the shadows, it's quite suspect. So really verify the information that you get and see whether it's legitimate or not. And yeah, and so I'd like to acknowledge colleagues within the Division of Medical Virology who provided some input on this, and Professor Clive Gray, who is my immunology mentor. He's taught me all the immunology, from being somebody who didn't to someone who's trying to understand it a bit, and to all the biomedical scientists who really have participated in these vaccine trials, and of course the candidates who have participated in these clinical trials, and these amazing Instagram and Twitter handles, which provide really good scientific information in a way that anyone can understand. So I personally would like to punt the Viral Truth at the Viral Truth handle, which is curated by virologists and virologists in training here at Medical Virology, as a source of information that is legitimate. And I think I'll end there and we can take any questions if there are any. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Nari. That was really wonderful. I think it was a very nice overview. It was possible to follow. It can become very technical. So I'm glad that you had all the images and really made it accessible to everybody. Also some nice responses in the chat. There are quite a number of questions in the Q&A panel. I'm very glad to see those coming up. What I'm going to ask, I see Jinal also started answering some of them already, but Nari, if you don't mind answering in the Q&A, then we're going to continue with the next session. And if there are still questions that are not answered, then we will take them live. Wonderful. So we will now turn to the Q&A session, as I said. We are very pleased to be joined by 3 students from Jeppe High School for Girls, Aastha Prajapti, Thiara Moodley, and Charlotte Chambers. They are interested in biology and are in fact top in their class. So we are very pleased to have them with us. They will be asking questions to Dr. Jinal Bhiman, who is the scientific lead for the Global Immunology and Immune Sequencing for Epidemic Response in South Africa. And they aim to investigate vaccine and infection-induced antibody responses to SARS-CoV-2. Jinal draws upon 10 years of experience in HIV host virus dynamics, and since 2019 has focused on SARS-CoV-2, respiratory syncytial virus, and influenza. She's a founding member of the Network for Genomic Surveillance in South Africa, and led the rapid establishment and verification of the first diagnostic tests for the detection of SARS-CoV-2 in South Africa. Jinal has a PhD in virology from WITS, with a postdoc in HIV virology from the NICD, and another in HIV vaccine development from Scripps Research in California in the US. So welcome all of you. And we are going to start with Aastha, who will be asking the first questions.
Thank you for welcoming me. My first question is, I have noticed that people prefer taking certain vaccines over others. Is there a reason behind this? Are some vaccines more effective, or are they all the same?
Thanks, Theresa, for the introduction, and thank you, Aastha, for the really nice question. So yeah, you're right. People do prefer different vaccines, whether it's for an informed reason or not. But if we speak about what's available currently in South Africa, we have the mRNA vaccine supplied by Pfizer, and then the adenovirus vectored vaccine supplied by Johnson & Johnson. And initially, when the clinical trials were performed for these vaccines, definitely the mRNA vaccines elicited higher antibody responses. And this is just talking in terms of magnitude than the Johnson & Johnson. But as time has progressed and as we've come out of the clinical trial phase and we've seen the real world results where people are actually just being vaccinated and we're seeing what does this mean, I think both vaccines perform admirably and comparably in terms of protecting individuals from severe infection and from hospitalization and death. So I would say, definitely they have different bases. So for some individuals, if you have certain health conditions, your doctor might recommend one over another. But in terms of their performance and in terms of their ability to prevent people from getting really, really sick with SARS-CoV-2, I think they have comparable results.
Thank you.
Okay, who would like to ask the next question? Thiara?
Will the vaccine continue to be effective as the virus mutates?
So I think the first point of clarification with respect to that question is that our goals have changed over the course of this pandemic. Initially, when we were trying to make a vaccine and when we were rolling out these vaccines, our goal was to prevent infection. That was what we wanted to do. And as time has progressed, we've seen that that's really not, it's not achievable. And I think this is something that's generalizable to all respiratory viruses. And one of the reasons is because respiratory viruses infect in this area, the nose, the mouth, the eyes. And to have antibodies present at very, very high levels in those areas for sustained periods of time is very difficult. The turnover in this area, if you think about your mucus areas, your snot or spit, all of that, it's very rapid. So it's difficult to keep antibodies at a high enough level in the upper respiratory area. And so it's not really for us any longer a realistic goal to be able to prevent infection from SARS-CoV-2 through vaccination for the general population. And so what we're now trying to achieve, our secondary goal, is to prevent people from getting hospitalized. And so, yeah, if we have that basis of that kind of basis of understanding, I think it kind of makes the question a little bit easier to answer. Can you just repeat the question one more time?
Will the vaccines continue to be effective as the virus mutates?
Right. So how this relates to then the changing variants is that we've seen, as this virus has been mutating, we've seen that the vaccines are less and less effective at preventing infection. But the one thing that has remained is that regardless of the number of changes that have accumulated in these variants, the vaccines are still effective at preventing people from dying and at preventing people from being hospitalized. So despite the fact that as new variants are coming up, we're seeing a decrease in the ability of vaccines to prevent infection, they're still able to achieve our secondary goal. And I think that's more important. If you get infected with SARS-CoV-2 after being vaccinated, and you just have a little bit of a snotty nose, you have a little bit of a headache, it's really manageable. It's something you can deal with. However, if you have to end up in hospital and our hospitals get overwhelmed, that's something then that results in many more people dying. So I think the fact that we have changed our standards for vaccination, it doesn't matter. And interestingly, if I can just throw in a tidbit of virology for you all, if you look at individuals who've been vaccinated either with the Johnson & Johnson vaccine or the Pfizer, there are some people that have responses, or immune responses that the vaccine has taught their body that can recognize SARS-CoV-1, so the first one that came up in 2003, that is 20% different from SARS-CoV-2. So that's pretty incredible. That means the vaccines that we are giving people now probably can tolerate 20% change in the virus before they probably might need to be revised or changed. So I hope that answers that.
It does, thank you. Will the vaccines ever be available to take orally, such as a pill instead of the injection?
Yeah, so currently they are, if you remember Nyari's pipeline, the 5 steps before a vaccine can be, or a drug can be licensed for use in humans. Currently, the oral vaccines are in the very first step. So well, not the very first, they're in phase 1 clinical trials. So they've been through animals, they look like they're safe and they're good. And now they're going into humans to look at whether they're safe. So not yet whether they can prevent infection or prevent hospitalization, but rather whether they don't cause any weird side effects and things like that. So definitely if they pass all the rounds of evaluation, I think that would be something that many people would prefer to take. Some people are afraid of vaccines and afraid of getting poked. And so an oral vaccine might be preferable. But also, you know, a tablet is much more stable than having a little vial of liquid. And so, especially in low-income countries like South Africa, like other countries in Africa, this might be a preferred mode of vaccination if we don't have to keep our vaccines very, very cold, and we can give people room temperature tablets. So hopefully, if these vaccines pass all the hoops and hurdles that they have to go through, hopefully they will become available in the coming years.
Okay, thank you.
Jinal, what about an intranasal vaccine? We've heard a lot about the mucosal immunity and how important that is. How far along are they with that?
So those are also at the relatively early stages. I think there's currently a trial which is looking at combining a SARS-CoV-2 influenza and RSV intranasal vaccine. But like I say, it's early stages. They don't have efficacy data yet. They've passed the safety trials, but no efficacy data as of yet. Probably it will work. And again, it's just nice to have options, right? If you go to a store, even for example, it's nice to have different flavors of, I don't know, chocolate. That's my go-to to choose from. And so for a vaccine, the same thing. There's so many different personalities in the world, so many different preferences. And so nasal might be something that's easier to administer, for example, to little babies. So yeah, still early stages though.
Okay, great. So I want to go back to our students. Aastha, do you have any other questions you would like to ask?
Yes, I have this other question. So what happens if your first dose is Pfizer and your second dose is Moderna or any other different COVID vaccine?
So there's a couple of really good studies that have looked at what's called heterologous vaccination. So you have J&J and then Pfizer or vice versa. And there's nothing, there's no like adverse effects or anything like that. In actual fact, generally, they look to be better. For example, than if you were to get 2 J&Js. If you got a J&J and then a Pfizer, you get a higher antibody titer. But overall, I don't think it really changes much. I think the only advantage from an immunological point of view is if you, for example, got J&J, right? So J&J, the way that vaccine works is the SARS-CoV-2 part of the SARS-CoV-2 virus, just one little tiny piece, that's the spike protein, is incorporated into an adenovirus, which is a harmless virus. Typically, it will maybe cause a common cold type of symptoms. So it's incorporated into this harmless virus. And sometimes some people have already pre-existing immunity to those kinds of viruses. And so in that situation where you've had kind of a weak response following vaccination, it might be good to get a Pfizer. But yeah, it's not necessarily bad or anything. It's actually fine. It's acceptable. It's good. And it's also good to get homologous, but I would say it's better to get a homologous vaccine schedule with an mRNA vaccine regimen rather than the ad.
Thank you.
Is it safe for children, pregnant women, and the elderly to take the vaccine?
Yeah, definitely. We have, so for children, we have data, safety data from 5 years and up for the mRNA vaccines. And yeah, very safe. There's nothing to be concerned about. For Pfizer, for example, in kids, it's a lower dose than what the adults get. And that adjustment of the amount of vaccine that you give kids versus the amount of vaccine that you give adults was done to try and lower the myocarditis side effects that Nyari also spoke about. So in terms of little kids, it's very safe. In terms of pregnant women, the same thing, very safe. The dosage hasn't changed, but it is safe. And in terms of older folk, the elderly, definitely it's safe. And in fact, they are our most high risk individuals, in terms of people who might get severe COVID and might die. So it's critically important that the elderly get vaccinated and get boosted. So if you recall, I was saying that our goals have changed in terms of preventing infection. If we think about elderly folk, and if we think about people who are immunocompromised or people who have additional health issues that might predispose them to severe COVID, in those individuals, if we can boost more frequently and keep antibody titers high, even if we don't prevent them from getting infected, at least when they do get infected, they will have a lower viral load. And so then they will have a less chance of having severe COVID.
Yeah. Do people need a booster if they are fully vaccinated and have had COVID?
So I guess it kind of relates to the previous question in that boosters, I think, are important for key populations. So they're important for people who might have other health conditions, who might be older. The other reason why it's important for older people to get boosted, even if they've had COVID, is in the same way as how your brain starts to remember less and less the older you get. Your immune system memory also remembers less and less. And so in people that are over 65, the T cell memory, for example, is much less good at remembering than somebody who's younger. And so that's why it's important for older people, even if they've had COVID, to get boosted, because their immune system would have forgotten over time. But yeah, it's key populations. Not necessarily everybody needs to get boosted if you've had COVID, but I definitely think the focus should be on older people and people who have conditions that affect their immune system.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Jinal. Can we talk a little bit about the quality of the immune response after natural infection versus after a vaccination?
So, okay, let's break it down. And again, I'm going to refer to the Pfizer and Johnson & Johnson vaccines because that's mostly what we're using here in South Africa. So when you get infected naturally, you're infected with the entire virus, right? So that's 4 different structural proteins. There's many more proteins that are within the virus. And so it's a completely kind of different way of presenting the virus to the body, okay? And when you get infected, the virus gets into your cells and it starts replicating and making more of itself and more of its proteins. And what happens when you get infected is there are 2 very, very immunogenic proteins that are part of SARS-CoV-2. So 2 proteins that really elicit very strong immune responses. And the first is the spike protein, which you might have heard about, and that's on the outside of the virus. It's what the virus uses to actually bind to your cells and then gain entry into your cells. And then the second is the nucleocapsid protein, and that's actually inside the virus. It actually helps to stabilize the RNA that encodes this virus. And so if you think about developing an immune response that wants to prevent infection, you obviously would aim for something that's on the outside of the virus and not for something that's on the inside. So you want to aim for spike rather than nucleocapsid. But when the virus infects you and it starts replicating, it makes a lot of nucleocapsid, way more nucleocapsid than spike. And so when you get infected, naturally, your immune response, especially the antibody response, is heavily skewed towards nucleocapsid. And so you have all of these really high nucleocapsid antibodies. And depending on how high the viral load is, you have lower spike antibodies. But when you get vaccinated with Johnson & Johnson or Pfizer, like I said, they only have one little piece, and that's the spike. That's the only part of SARS-CoV-2 that those vaccines have. And so your immune response that you develop after vaccination is, in terms of the SARS-CoV-2 specific responses, it's completely 100% honed in on that spike protein. So it's very different in terms of the quality of the response. But probably because the vaccination presentation is much more focused, when you get vaccinated, you have much more durable responses in general than when you are infected. And it's probably also got to do with the dose. When you get vaccinated, everybody gets the exact same dose. It's standardized across the board. Whereas when you get infected, it's a variety. You don't actually know how much virus is infecting you. And so, yeah, I hope that answers that question. So difference in the quality and also the durability of the responses.
Absolutely. And do we know anything about the memory T cell responses? If there's a difference between, I know that's a difficult question, between vaccination and natural infection.
So again, obviously, if you're infected, you will have memory T cell responses to nucleocapsid and spike. Whereas if you're just vaccinated, you will only have memory T cell responses against spike. In terms of like magnitude and things like that, it's not that distinct. I would say it's not that clear. Where it is clear is in people who've been hospitalized. Generally, they have, higher chance of making T cell responses. But I wouldn't say that the distinction is 100% clear in terms of magnitude of responses. In terms of durability, I'm not sure whether infection or vaccination induces more durable T cell responses.
Yeah, I think it's too soon to tell for that. There is a question in the Q&A that fits quite nicely. It asks about the duration of protection after the booster vaccine. So are we likely to see an increase in the number or frequency of boosters?
How long does duration of protection after the booster? So I think we don't know that for sure. The problem is the variants. That is the issue. So even though we'll get boosted and we have really high titers, I think even 2 months after being vaccinated, those titers start waning. And if you've got a new variant that has come up now and that has additional escape mutations, if you had, say, titers waning from 1 in 1,000 to 1 in 500 after 2 months, this is just an example, that might be really effective at protecting from infection from the original variant. But now with Omicron, that's not good enough. You need to have higher titers. So it's a bit of a difficult question for me to answer. And the second part was, are we likely to see an increase in the number or frequency of boosters? So this takes me back to my point that, our goals for vaccination have changed. So if you're a young, healthy person, you don't have any comorbidities, you don't have any issues that might predispose you to severe COVID, I don't think that it's necessary for you to get boosted. especially in South Africa, especially in Africa, where our vaccine coverage is severely lacking, where we have people who have not even had one vaccine yet. We thought I think the data from Nyari showing we have about 50% coverage. We think that's bad, right? When we compare to the US and the UK. But if we look at other countries like Senegal, for example, they have between 80 to 90% seroprevalence. That's how many people have been infected in that country, but less than 2% vaccine coverage. So, we should also be thinking about others in other low and middle income countries, others in Africa, and really trying to distribute to make sure that everybody gets at least one dose of the vaccine. And in South Africa, we should focus on getting our elderly boosted and immunocompromised HIV positive people boosted and things like that.
Wonderful. I see there's a very lively discussion going on in the Q&A. Thank you, Clive, and other people who are chiming in there as well. I think there are clearly concerns about safety with vaccines. I think there are still a lot of people who see COVID as not, as maybe like a flu, especially now with Omicron. There was this, perception that it was not as dangerous. But we certainly in the hospital saw very high mortality still with Omicron. Also in younger people. So it's not always predictable who will get very ill from COVID. And I think for that reason, we are very strongly supportive of vaccination efforts. Also, I see a lot of patients with long COVID that were, well before they developed COVID and then have tremendous long-term effects because of the infection. I'm sure a lot of people have seen that article in Nature where they showed the brain abnormalities that can persist after COVID or SARS-CoV-2 infection. So those are certainly things that we need to look at going forward. I've not seen that in people who've been vaccinated. I don't know if you have any opinion about that, Jinal.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. So we are always thinking about the now, and we never really think about the long-term impacts. And definitely, so the brain reduction in brain size in people who've had COVID, but also increase in cardiovascular issues. I think there was a study looking at individuals who had been infected with COVID before vaccination and looking at them 1 year later. And they also then had obviously a control group that did not get infected with COVID, and the group that did get infected with COVID had much more increased chances of a variety of cardiovascular issues. So, we think of it as a respiratory virus, but it really is quite systemic. It does go quite widespread through our body. You probably know you can even detect it in a person's stool, which means it's gone right through your body. And so, yeah, I agree with you. Very important to get vaccinated because it's not just about the now. You might even recover, from COVID. And then 1 year later, you start having a heart problem.
Absolutely. There's one question about the adjuvants that are used in the current vaccines. I don't know if you just want to cover that one quickly. Which adjuvants are used for the current vaccines? I actually don't know the specific names, but in terms of adjuvants globally, there are only 4 that are approved for use, regardless of the vaccine. So the adjuvants that are being used for SARS-CoV-2 have been used in other vaccines for years. I hope that answers where that question was going to. Great. So I think most of the questions have been answered. I think there are some technical questions that we're not going to take now, but I'm happy to engage with people who have more technical type of questions by email. You can also post them via the society, and I'm sure between Jinal and Nari and Clive, we will be able to answer them for the people who are really interested in that. So before we come to a close, I just want to show you, we've been developing some short videos to just address some of the common issues that people are concerned with regards to the vaccines. And we've done that together with our social science colleagues. So I really want to thank especially Professor Tessa Marcus, who's been very helpful in this regard. And I would like us to now show the one video. It is available on the SAIS website, so people are able to use it. They can distribute it widely if they think it will be of use. So Bon, if I can ask you to play the video for us quickly, please.
Worried the vaccine will kill your manhood? You are right to be concerned, but it is not the vaccine you have to worry about. It's getting COVID that can affect your performance. Many people who get COVID suffer from extreme tiredness and feeling of breathlessness. Also, the virus SARS-CoV-2 causes inflammation that can affect the heart and the surrounding muscles. This can narrow or block the blood vessels that take blood to your penis and around your body, making it difficult to get an erection. Research shows men who have had COVID are almost 6 times more likely to develop erectile dysfunction. So now you know it's not getting vaccinated that affects your sexual performance. It's getting COVID. Choose to protect your health. Get vaccinated. Practice safe sex. Protect your future.
Thank you so much, Bon. So it was quite interesting that we found when we spoke to people in the community that this was one of their biggest concerns regarding the vaccines. So this brings us to the end of the webinar, and I really want to thank our wonderful speakers. Nari, it was really a wonderful summary. Thank you to the girls from Jeppe High School for Girls. Those were wonderful questions. Thank you, Jinal, for fielding all of them. So on behalf of all the speakers, the South African Immunology Society and Immunopaedia, I would like to thank you for joining us and taking time to attend today's webinar. I hope your questions have been answered. Please also look at the SAIS website where we've uploaded more information about the vaccines, including these short videos that like the one I've just shown you now. You will also find information about our monthly webinars on the website, and we hope to see you again soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.